welcome to A Stab in the Dark. We're doing a TV series, and it's you. Yeah, that's right. No, not you. Oh, we've been through this.
I'm going to do it every time.
This is Dave.
Hello.
This is Mike.
Hello.
And they have not seen this show before. They're on their first ever watch of you. And so we are documenting that with this weekly podcast of the first series, and we're going to get their reactions and the plot. I have seen this, but it's been a long, long time since I have, so I'm not going to give anything away. We're just going to go week by week as we do it. So we, last time out, we finished the first episode with Joe knocking Benji the fuck out with a big old
Benji
mallet.
the asshole.
Well, don't say that with such glee. He's misunderstood.
Looney Tunes him. Yeah, deservedly so.
And we've got episode 2, The Last Nice Guy in New York. So off the bat, you enjoying this one, Mike?
What, this episode in particular?
Yeah, this episode in particular.
Yeah. I mean, it evolved on from pulling faces, man.
What the fuck else would he be asking
I
about?
thought you meant the series so far, you know, like the whole thing. But okay, yes, episode 2 builds on the next one. It was interesting to see the fact that Benji wasn't dead, and he was deciding what to do with him throughout the episode. That was quite interesting. Shows that he's on a path towards darkness, but he's not already at Dexter levels, right? He's not already at the point where he's just dispatching people in our life because they're getting away with him, which is interesting. And the evolution of his relationship, whatever it be termed as, with Beck is quite interesting as well.
What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I liked it as well. It immediately reminded me of the first, basically, storyline in Breaking Bad.
Right.
Because it's basically, it's a very similar thing, right? He has, is it Crazy 8, like, tied up in his garage?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
And
yeah.
then he's agonizing for like an episode and a half about whether or not to kill him.
Yeah.
It reminded me exactly of that.
Yeah.
It's a good comparison.
Yeah. And
I feel like that's a common TV show trope, isn't it? Basically, when people are breaking bad, then they're putting themselves on a path where they have someone under their power that they can't let go, and they don't know what to do with them. I think that you see that a lot.
Yeah, because in a way, it's kind of an easy way to empathize with a situation where someone crosses a line. Like, if you get yourself in that situation where basically the only way out of it is that you kill them.
Yeah, and it's a fun, interesting way to build characters every time they do it, right? Because every single character, you get a full scope of what their rationality and morality is like by giving them this quandary to deal with.
Yeah, and it is actually a bit more interesting, like you say, that he doesn't just murder him straight away.
Yeah.
It adds a bit of texture, right, to him.
It humanizes him.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something you'd need to do because he's the protagonist, right? Yeah. Because it's not like Dexter. I'm going to keep saying Dexter because it reminds me a lot of Dexter, but it's not like Dexter where you're already given, the reason he's killing. They'd have to do that if he was killing people. You can't just throw him in as a killer, I feel like, and still have him as the protagonist in a show.
Which is actually kind of sad because that would be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that would be interesting for us as horror fans.
Yeah,
I feel like the number of
sad.
horror shows that really catch on and have a big audience is quite small. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea in this that Joe is agonizing, as you're saying, and that he isn't just there he's trying to, in a way, in his own mind, come up with a way to save him.
Yeah.
And so how can he let him go rather than kill him? He doesn't actually want to just, out of his own sick pleasure, he doesn't just want to kill him, and that he is there's a lot more depth to him, and I think that adds to like being able to make a show a bit of longevity in it as well, that it isn't just immediately giving it everything.
Yeah.
You got to pace yourself a bit.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that whether the show follows that dynamic where he crosses a line, and then there's an episode of him dealing with whether he wants to. Well, he's about to cross a line, and there's an episode with him dealing whether he should cross that line, what he can do to avoid crossing that line, and then inevitably he's probably going to cross that line, and he's going to get deeper and deeper. I imagine that might be an ongoing process with different, quandaries he's put in.
But we basically got Benji in this predicament in the whole episode, surrounding other bits of Beck and things like this. So what do we make of this specific thing throughout the recurring scenes with him and Benji? Did you enjoy the agonizing of it? I thought he was quite torturous to Benji at times, even if it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah, he was definitely torturous of him through actual neglect.
Yeah.
Like getting him the wrong food, forgetting to come see him for who knows how long in
because
story
he gets
time,
obsessed
but, like,
with
a
Beck.
couple of
He
days.
forgets. Yeah.
He's like an afterthought to him, isn't he, basically? And he's almost rumbled by the kid going down there as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows just how kind of haphazard everything else that he's done is with precision, but because he's not sure what to do with this guy he's got locked up.
But it's kind of surprising.
It introduces a bit of mess to it.
It almost like he made a mistake with Benji. Like he didn't think it all the way through, like everything else, because he removed Benji from the picture for her, and every other action that he's taken for her has been so calculated.
But this was rash. It feels like rash.
Did in the first episode, did Benji like insult him? Do you think there was like a personal element to it as well, that made him?
There's a huge jealousy thing, isn't there, to do with it, and that she is going out with this guy who is just bad for her, and anyone around her can see it. But also, he's got a savior complex with her, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He thinks that
he also feels personally insulted purely because he's viewing Beck more and more as a possession of his.
Yeah,
and it's like someone breaking his books.
And he's getting in the way of them getting together, or that's at least how he sees things happening. He's like, wow, if he was out of the way and she could only see me, and that has now happened.
Yeah, and it proves that he doesn't really understand Beck, or maybe even has problems understanding normal emotional responses, by the fact that when she's worried about Benji and she's messaging him and like talking to her friends about it and whether she should involve the police rather than just completely letting it go, that seems to surprise him. He doesn't seem prepared.
He hasn't taken that into account whatsoever.
Yeah, as if he has no fundamental understanding of emotional responses that she might have, or no fundamental understanding at all of who as a person she is.
Do we give any credence to Benji's thoughts while he's in the glass cage, where he's talking about, is Beck worth this? Is someone's obsession in this respect?
Oh, yeah, he belittles her, right, and puts it down, says that she's not the person that Joe thinks she is, basically. Yeah. It's so quite early to say. I don't know if there's much evidence to say right now concretely. I mean, there's a scene at the end of the episode when she basically gets revenge on her thesis advisor, right?
Yeah.
Which was a really cool scene. I didn't actually expect that, because they're setting it up right, that you think that she's gonna give him what he wants.
Yeah.
And then she comes out, and you're like, oh, okay, so there's definitely more going on with this character than you think.
Yeah, but possibly only under the influence of what Joe primed her to do, right? She certainly, gives all the credit to him for her doing that.
But this is where they become friends, where he gets friend zoned in. I love that scene where he's like, oh, I'm so glad I met you and you're my friend. And he's like, oh,
his
God.
reaction is like, oh.
Yeah. Too kind.
But I think it'll be interesting to see whether the show is quite reserved with how much Beck we get to see, and it continues to play with whether our perception, and therefore Joe's perception of Beck, is actually who Beck is, or whether Benji is more correct, or maybe there'll be other characters with viewpoints differing from those on who Beck is, and those might hold more true.
Do you think it would have been interesting, just hypothetically, if they never left Joe's point of view in the whole story, and we never got scenes of characters outside of Joe?
Yeah, I mean, possibly I would have preferred that. It might not have made it more of... it would have made it probably less of a mainstream show, I imagine.
Yeah.
But I think that would have been very interesting, because if they continued on the inner monologue kind of way, not only would it appeal to me in a peep showy kind of way, but it would also appeal to me because it'd be a solid character study completely of this main character, which is kind of what it is. But it's also not that, because we're getting more and more stuff from the perspective of, or at least only involving Beck.
I would struggle somewhat with that, because I like to be able to empathise with a different character. I want to empathise with Beck, who... What's one of the lines she says in this, that where she's basically like, God, I just feel like I keep attracting... like arseholes or something. I can't remember exactly what it is. A magnet for dudes with serious issues.
Yeah. That's another wink to the camera. Yeah.
And you can see Joe's face is like,
No self-awareness.
but I want to empathize with these I don't want it just on Joe specifically, because there wouldn't be these moments of comedy in such a way. It wouldn't be the same.
I think his voiceover is like some of the funniest parts for me.
They are,
yeah.
But they're also with the added context of what we know about the other characters. They don't just happen.
But I think a lot of the comedy comes from the disparity between his version and the real world. So you're talking about if you're seeing the real world divorced from Joe completely, you get more of a clear comparison between the two, right? And I think that is possible if Joe was the only protagonist, the only character that we were following, but it would be a bit more of a difficult challenge to do. You possibly have to film it differently as well. I think
it wouldn't be very good for TV. I think that's the issue. It would take a lot more work and a lot more time, probably a lot more money and a lot more reshoots.
Probably be better shoot short form as well.
Yeah,
I don't know how long that you could feasibly progress the story.
I'm happy to follow Joe as your main character, but I like the addition of Beck.
Yeah, it's still an unusual main character, even though he's not like the sole protagonist, sole character we follow. It's still an interesting choice for a leading.
It is, yeah, and he is still only the character that we get the voiceover for, and we get no other characters, right? So he is differentiated, from the other characters in that way. I was just thinking hypothetically, it'd be quite interesting. You mentioned Peep Show, and we don't hear the thoughts of any of the characters, right, apart from Mark and Jez.
Yeah, but there's also not a single scene in the entire series that doesn't have at least one of them in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there's a lot of comedy mined from like their warped view of the other characters, because we do actually get a pretty good perception of like the other characters.
Yeah. But my concern would be, because it's not a full comedy, it would become a lot more of a psychological, almost it would be very literary, and you would have to like read into a lot of what he's saying, and then it would be a bit highbrow.
And Peep Show is 20 minutes long as well. They don't have to build upon a week to week. A lot of them are standalone, aren't they? In Peep Show, I know there is a through line, but there's there's a standalone nature to each episode.
It's a lot more difficult to write it. I think it would be great, as you say, but I think it's a lot more difficult to write that in a long form entertainment.
Probably. Yeah.
Especially when it's a drama. Yeah.
How do we feel then about Beck's character developing, since we see more of these other characters, not just Joe, as we've been discussing? What do we make of Beck? More respect or less respect? Like, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, I liked her. As I said, I liked her a lot more after her interaction with with her thesis advisor.
Yeah, and I think that's the first time I did like her, because she was for the first time trying to seize her life, right? And that was her. That wasn't. She should have given herself credit for that. In my view, she was giving it to Joe erroneously, but she was no longer the pitiable person in the first.
I would say in some respects that her going to that guy and threatening it and not doing it, even though she has this hard evidence, she's kind of in it for herself.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's interesting.
Kind of selfish.
Like, it makes her like more interesting. Yeah.
But it makes that professor, when she's gone out of uni and she's doing other things, like, surely then that professor is just getting away with it still, because in the future
she's only taking control of her life, and progressing her wants and desires, and she isn't being benevolent and actually helping these other women.
Yeah.
And if anything, possibly hurting their chances of getting any kind of justice if she's made a wheeling and dealing to let him off. Yeah.
In a way, like, what you're saying is correct, and it makes the character interesting, but and she credits that to Joe.
Yeah.
But it's a big jump for someone to take that. It's not just like standing up for yourself. It's like, it's a big jump, right?
We know she's hungry as well. Yeah, she's hungry for success, but on her own.
Yeah, but she's gone from like 0 to 100, right? Yeah. Like, she's not just like standing up for herself. She's literally selling, but she's dangling the futures of, these other women.
Yeah, like it's a powerful move, and I don't think it's got anything really to do with Joe, because he was speaking vaguely, wasn't he, about her life. She took that information, and okay, maybe there's a bit of a credit there. He applied it to her situation, and then came up with a quite smart idea, and reached out to these other women and put the work in and the time in to completely reverse her situation. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have this party scene within this episode where she takes Joe to this friend's Peach. I can't remember the famous last name she has. What's the famous last name?
Oh, Salinger.
Salinger, yeah. That's Salinger.
Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah. So we're introduced more to this Peach character. What do we make of Peach? Because she seems to be the only one within the show at the moment who's showing some suspicion with when he's looking at the books in the house, and she kind of comes over.
Oh yeah,
to him.
It's
like, so you just happen to be
there. Yeah.
At the same time, I think it's a bit of a leap for her, as in maybe she's just being protective and just making sure.
No, it's like it's a bit like she watched episode 1. To be honest with you, like, it's way too much of a leap. Like, but then
But at the same time, how many people live in New York? Like, I don't know,
ridiculous
millions and
amounts.
millions. So maybe it is a bit of a ridiculous, almost unbelievable coincidence that he would be there at the exact
8
time.
million.
Especially as he was the only other person there that wasn't just some hobo on the street in the terminal.
But then again, these things do happen.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Like,
at the same
genuinely
time,
do
to
coincidences
literally
do
accuse
happen.
a stranger of being a stalker, like 0 to 100 again.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I've been on holiday in other places and seen people I know there randomly.
this stuff happens.
So
yeah,
it does happen. So
I think
it
basically
says
just
more about her as a person and maybe her relationship with Beck.
maybe. To be honest, it feels more like the writing is setting her up to be a future victim
Antagonist.
of Joe. Yeah.
He's gonna hit the mallet.
Yeah. But maybe. Yeah.
He's like Jason. He's got his weapon now. He's always.
It's pretty
he's always
cool.
going to be malleting.
Or he's just instantly a serial killer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're introduced to her, and we're also introduced to this friend, and we are thinking about this friend of Candice, his ex.
Yeah, that was an interesting.
So what do we
thing,
think
wasn't
of
it?
going
Yeah.
on there?
So we don't get much to go on, right? But there's definitely an implication that he made her disappear.
It dangles the possibility of this having happened before, almost this exact same situation, and it didn't end well because this woman
Clearly
apparently disappeared.
Yeah.
Maybe he's still running the social media for this woman in Paris or wherever she was supposed to have
Yeah,
gone.
because Joe is now running Benji's social media while he's locked up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Crack is whack. And
Yeah. Setting up like shots.
my
of
favourite
him.
sport is freebasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to see what may happen with that.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that it kind of runs at ends with the very brief mention we get of that in either the first episode or towards the start of this episode, where he says he followed this person and it didn't work out, and I blame myself or something.
Yeah.
And it seems like maybe that's messed him up, and maybe from a humanist point of view, maybe that's what's put him on a path where he's gonna like go very hard onto a relationship to make sure that it is exactly how I want, over hard. But based on this conversation, actually,
he was always that way.
It's not a new thing, and it's not anything tied to that. He's done this before, and he'll do it again probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I found I think some of the main few bits I picked up on this time watching how desperate Benji is. I do feel really sorry for him, especially when he like dangles the cocaine in front of him and is like, if you want this, you have to give me your phone, like, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like,
I did love the bit
Benji.
though where he tries the different sodas and he's like, none of them. They're all like shit dollar
Like,
store
yeah.
pieces of garbage.
They're all yours.
Yeah.
It's like bullshit.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. I mean, I hate Benji. Obviously, he's
No.
garbage. But like, he was kind of like bearing himself, and he was. There was a point as well where Joe was in the confines, right, sweeping up or whatever, and he wasn't fighting him or anything. In fact, he was looking internally and he was confessing his sins, basically. So it had got to him, and he'd acted like a human being should, I guess.
we've also got the scene of Joe as a teenager, so we go back in time, flashback to the bookstore owner.
Yep.
What do you make of that, and how Joe's developed since then?
Yeah, it's quite interesting when taken with the scene in the first episode where we go back and forth between the owner and himself as they're making the same speech about the
Yeah,
books.
they parallel the
bit,
characters. Yeah, it's very
So
like
it's quite interesting that we get that parallel later on, and then we see that he's
clearly
actually
like
victimized.
cast a big shadow, and it seems to be
Yeah.
like somewhat of,
influence.
something of an abusive relationship. It seems to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, he was locked in there.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then when Benji says something along the lines of like, "You left me in there," you know what that's feels like or something, and he's like, "Well, yeah, I know a little something about that," because presumably he was left in there for a long time as well. So it goes a long way in a short period of time to like reinforcing what possibly led him along this path to the man he is now. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because in the party, like Beck abandons him immediately, and then he goes and finds like the old books, and he ends up stealing one, right?
Yeah.
And there's no one watching him. He's by himself. He's actually acting, and he actually clearly does actually value books.
Yeah.
And presumably that the relationship with like the previous shop owner is the cause of that, and it must have been a very impactful relationship for him. Was he an orphan? Was there any history on?
I don't think we really know.
No, but
Nothing has been said.
Nothing said yet.
He said very early on, I think, that he was taken in by the bookstore owner or something. And I mean, it seems like he's still alive, right? Like I think that was mentioned.
Yeah, he is. He's just really
very
old.
Oh
apparently.
right, yeah.
So I'm guessing we're going to get more of that.
Maybe he's alive.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Maybe he's in a rocking chair, like Psycho, up in the in the room.
Oh yeah, he's got. I reckon he's got a big old mallet hole in his head. That's what I think.
yeah. He's Looney Tunes.
Incidentally, sorry, before we go on, I think it's in this scene when he's talking to Paco. That my favorite quote of the episode, which
Is this a new thing then? You're going to do
I'm
this?
just doing
Quote of the episode?
this. Quote of the
Dave's
episode.
quote of the week.
We're going to
always-
get some filler episode.
it's
It's going to
always
be quote of the
from
week.
Joe.
It's
No,
just
no.
some like.
It's going to be some always Paco and Joe so far anyway. And
Is this one going to be a quote from a book as well, or is it going to be an authentic
it is
line?
All for one and one for all.
it is book related because he gives Joe gives Paco Frankenstein.
Yep.
And Paco reads it and says, "Oh, it's really like." Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "Oh, it's really interesting, like the monster's actions." This is a real thing. Like,
Making a meal here.
how like the monster, the Frankenstein's monster commits all these actions, but because you're inside his head, it feels okay when you read it.
Yeah, it's
And I
like
was
a meta commentary on the show, isn't
yeah.
it? Yeah. Which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And might be thematically more relevant as we go along, right? Like, theoretically, Joe is the monster, and theoretically, Frankenstein is the bookstore.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So that might evolve as a metaphor similarity going forward. We'll have to see.
Yeah. So, yes. Do we think Joe broke the rules at the end of this episode where where Benji comes up with a deal, like mutually assured destruction, by giving him the video and access to the videos which show hazing a friend to death?
What do you mean broke the rules? What, by killing him?
Yeah, because it's like Benji's trying desperately to find a way to survive.
Yeah, of course he broke the rules. He broke their agreement. Benji didn't agree to get murdered.
No, but Benji is
No, it
trying...
happened off camera.
Oh, right, okay.
Benji is trying to find a way to get out of this predicament. It's like, if I give him my worst moment and I have his worst moment...
Yeah.
I don't think Joe was going to accept a solution offered by somebody else that he didn't come up with himself. He wanted to be the one in control and the one to resolve the situation. I don't think he liked the fact that Benji, of all people, was the person that came up with the answer to the dilemma that he suffered with all episode.
And he just comes up with another excuse like, I just don't like the way you treated Beck, you know.
Yeah.
It's all
This
bullshit.
is not
it's bullshit.
At the same time, it's also a test of whether he's lying about his peanut allergy as well. Like, he didn't really know, I imagine, whether it would kill him.
Yeah, to be fair, he's probably pretty skeptical about that. But yeah, I think it's probably true that he was never going to agree to that. Like, I think as soon as Benji realized who he was, that was it.
Well, that was Benji's stupidest moment. He was like, oh, I remember you. He should just kept that to himself.
Yeah. And being as though he knows Benji's a moron and an asshole. Can he
no
really
one's going to believe. No one's going to believe him. Like, they could just let him go.
Beck might believe him there. That would be his problem. I don't know whether he'd give a shit about the police particularly. We don't know about that much so far. But he does value what Beck thinks. So if he had the ability to ruin the relationship of him and Beck, that would be his greatest fear.
All right, to end then, anything else that stood out for you both?
Check.
Anything else you might think, is like foreshadowing?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Foreshadowing is over there.
Yes.
Foreshadowing corner.
Foreshadowing corner.
Yeah.
It's foreshadowing in the same episode, but with the toilet hiding place.
Yeah.
He tells Paco to hide the book in the toilet.
Foreshadowing. This is not foreshadowing.
This is a real thing.
Go on, finish your point.
And then he hides Benji's phone there after Benji dies.
Right.
He hides
Yeah.
Benji's phone up there. Foreshadowing.
It's not. Do you know what foreshadowing
Well, I'm
is?
starting to think.
It's not.
You don't.
It's like saying they walked into the bathroom and then later on in the episode, they walked into the bathroom again. You saw it earlier and now it's happening now.
Yes. How would you define
okay,
foreshadowing?
So what's going to happen with that then? What's going on with that, Dave?
What with the phone?
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Is it going to continue with his...
I assume it's going to come back later.
Right.
Yeah, he's probably going to use it as he's presumably still got the video of Benji
Yeah.
killing that kid or whatever he did. He's got the phone that he can use to mine information from anyway. I mean, if he hides the body in some way, we don't know whether he's doing that or he's just putting him on the street as a death by, accidental death, or he's just going to use it to mine more information from Beck using
Well, wouldn't he make
Benji's phone?
Based on what happened to Candace, it's just going to make Benji disappear, right? And then just use the phone to
Yeah, correct.
keep the social media going.
I think it'd be quite fun if in a few episodes' time we get a pan through the roof and there's 30 phones up there. Yeah.
All right, there we go. That's episode 2. I'm excited to see where we go next. This is going to go places, so I'm looking forward to seeing both of your reactions as it does. And thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll look at the comments. These two can't because spoilers.
Spoilers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.